Hi, and welcome to the board wrap-up for the month of October 2013. The school year is flying by. Dr. Pennington joins us to visit with you about a few important things going on in our public schools. As we record our program, it's fall break. It's a good week for everybody to kind of catch their breath, but a lot of things are going on. And again, as you record this, the government still is in shutdown mode. And Dr. Pennington, I know that there may be some questions people have about how schools operate with a government shutdown, because there's a certain amount of funding and monies that are into our schools through the federal government. You took some steps at the October board meeting to make things easier to continue schools.
Last night, the board approved a resolution for us to issue non-payable warrants. And that probably is an odd term to people, and it may be something that some of our senior citizens may know about or may have heard of before, but it's something that we haven't done in schools in a long time in Oklahoma. At one time, we used to pay people with warrants. We didn't write checks, we wrote warrants. I can't really tell you the difference between a warrant and a check. I know that when I first started teaching in Oklahoma, I got a warrant, but it worked just like a check did. We all stopped that probably about 15 years ago and went to where we issued checks. But the law allows us to issue non-payable warrants. So what does that mean? Excuse me. Back when schools were operated primarily with property tax money, there might be a time during the year where schools actually ran out of money before they started to receive property tax revenues. Property taxes are assessed in December, collections start in January, they usually finish up March and April. And so back in the early days of public schools, schools would have a fund balance, and then they would use that fund balance to pay their bills from the start of school in September until property tax collections came in January. But there might be a situation where a school district ran out of money. And so in that case, they would issue what is known as a non-payable warrant. So the warrant would say, Miss Johnson, maybe her paycheck was $500, but it's a non-payable warrant. And so what that meant was there wasn't money in the bank account to pay for it. But districts had agreements with local banks that they would accept that non-payable warrant. So they would redeem that warrant, and then the bank would hold the warrant until there was enough money to till there was enough money to redeem the warrant. And then the school district then paid an interest on that warrant. The most they can pay is 5%. So that was basically how school districts borrowed money. Last night we took the step of approving the ability for the district to issue non-payable warrants in case we get to that. Now, how would that happen? Well, obviously, none of us really know what effect the government shutdown and the possible default that could happen, I guess, later this week without an agreement on raising the debt ceiling, what effect that will have. What we do know is this. Is about 15% of our budget is federal dollars. The way we get that money is we spend our money first, then we submit a claim to the State Department, and the State Department of Education, with the federal dollars they have, they pay us back for the money we've spent. But we have to spend our own money first. So it's possible that we could find ourselves sometime during this fiscal year in a situation that because of the decisions of the federal government, where the state doesn't have the federal money. So we've spent our money, the state doesn't have the federal money to pay us back, and so we theoretically could find ourselves where we don't have enough money, cash on hand, to pay the bills that we have. There could be a situation, you saw today that the governor, I think, said tomorrow that there will some state employees who are paid with federal dollars will start being furloughed. There's a possibility, probably a remote possibility, that because the state of Oklahoma depends upon federal dollars to pay so many employees, that there could be a situation where there's state employees are furloughed, and maybe the state dollars that are supposed to come to us, that are sent to us every month by electronic transfer, that the employee that presses that button to send the money to us isn't there. You know, so while I think those are really, I wouldn't say those things would happen, but I also would have said that in my lifetime I never believed that we would not, as a nation, that we wouldn't pay the debts we owe. The debts are backed by the full faith and credit of the federal government. It's never been held into question before, and obviously, the government has an unlimited ability to pay its bills, and that they can always raise taxes enough to collect the revenue that they need. Now, we may not like that, but that mechanism has always been there, and hopefully they'll get something settled this week, and we can move forward. But just in case they don't, we have that in place, so if we need to use it, we can.
You still have the cooperation of the banks to use these warrants too?
What will happen is, now that we've done this, we'll start contacting our local banks and see which banks are willing to do that. I don't know with certainty they will, but I would think they would, and then we'll negotiate an interest rate with them. Obviously, the maximum interest rate is 5%, but in today's market, I would assume that we could find somebody willing to redeem those warrants for less than 5%. Again, we hope we don't have to do this, but I think I take, when I read newspaper articles and I read where some of the leading economists and the Wall Street people are saying that if we default on the national debt, that it is an economic calamity like we have never seen before. And I know how our schools were affected by what happened with the Wall Street crash in 2008. I can't imagine anything being worse than that. But we're very dependent upon the economy, and if we have an economic collapse, then I think all bets are off. I don't think any of us can predict what will happen with our schools or with schools funding. So while, like most Americans, I've kind of sat back and said they're going to get this fixed, the closer we get, the more I'm concerned that we get it fixed. And I think, like most Americans, I don't understand why we have to do this every couple of years. I don't understand why Congress can't do its job. I know that they've got some big splits and they don't agree on things. But come on, guys. We send you up there to make decisions. That means you got to compromise. Not everybody gets everything they want. Let's put the country first and move forward.
There was some discussion. I know that we have an election in February. Do we have a date for that election?
We do, and I can't think of it right offhand.
I think it's the 14th.
I think it's the February 14th, and that's our next school board race. It is Ward number 4, which basically is kind of the middle of town. It's the Garfield district, and then part of the district that encompasses Roosevelt School. David Kincaid is the incumbent in that district, and every indication I have is that David's going to seek re-election, and I think, I don't know anybody in Ponca City that doesn't know David Kincaid. They haven't interacted with him either because he's coached, because of his involvement in youth football, or maybe he coached their child's soccer team somewhere along the way, or maybe they know him as a wrestling official, or maybe he takes care of their dog or cat. So I think everybody knows David, and he's kind of one of those icons of Ponca City, and he's done a good job as a board member. He has a soft heart for kids, and I would say that probably I don't think there's any doubt that while David's concerned about everything in the school system, he has a sharp eye out when it comes to athletics.
If people drive north of the high school, they're seeing the old Washington School building being worked on, and people may have been like me, they weren't aware, but I think this would be a good chance for you to update people about Washington Elementary, a school that we're going to put back in use next year.
Well, several years ago, we had a bond issue, and in that bond issue, we allocated money to repair the roof and fix the HVAC system at Washington School. We put that project off because we moved the alternative school out of there into other location. But we've collected that money for the purpose of doing that to Washington, so we're going to do that. You have to, anytime you have a building like that, it's always, you always question, do we keep it operational or do we mothball it? It just so happens that we know that we're going to need Washington for at least the next 2 years, because of the bond issue we passed last spring, which calls for extensive renovations at Woodlands and extensive renovations at Trout. We could do those and stay on those sites, but we believe it would disrupt education and it would take the projects longer to get done. So our plan is for next school year, we will move the students of Woodlands over to Washington for a year, get the Woodlands renovation done, and the next year we will move Trout students over there. And then after that, who knows? We've seen a steady growth of enrollment. We're back up to in the neighborhood of 5,400 students. If we were to continue to grow for the next 2 or 3 years, the way we have the last year or so, and we were to get up to 5,600, 5,700 students, I think we would probably have a need to reopen Washington as an elementary site of some kind. Now, whether it would be a traditional elementary school, whether we might put all the 4-year-olds over there, but there's lots of things we could do with it. But the bottom line is, right now, we are at capacity at our schools. Now, we will add some classroom space with the renovations that we're doing at Trout and Woodlands, but it wouldn't be enough to accommodate another 200 or 300 students across the district. So, this way we're prepared in case that happens. I think people are always surprised when they hear we're growing in students with what's happened in this community over the last 10 years. I think people are pretty surprised by that. But we are growing, and so we think there's a need, there's possibly a need sometime in the future to use Washington again.
Outstanding. For those that go to athletic events or any type of event on school campus property, there's another change that you need to know about that is officially underway, and that's no smoking rule at the Ponca City Public Schools anywhere on our school property. There were some limited restrictions, but those restrictions now are going to be 100% full-time, no smoking.
Right. Several years ago, we adopted a policy, a tobacco policy that forbade, said you're not supposed to use any tobacco products of any time on school property during school hours. And that we did school hours to be from 7:30 to 4 o'clock. And then from 4 o'clock on, at events in designated areas, you could smoke. As a part of the Ponca City Healthy Community Initiative, we revised our board policy last night, and now we are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, our campuses are tobacco free. So that's not only smoking, but it's also smokeless tobacco. And we also include the cartridge cigarettes, the e-cigarettes, and the water vapor cigarettes in that ban. So that starting today, at after-hour events, we will be smoke-free. Now, obviously, we know it's going to take people a while to adjust to that. We will get some signs up as soon as we can get some purchased that explain that. We'll make announcements at our athletic events that there's to be no smoking on school property. I'm sure that over the next year or so we'll have some people that forget that, but hopefully maybe in the next couple of years we can get that word out enough and people will recognize it, and we'll be a smoke-free facility. And I think that as we try to send a message to children that is consistent, I think that is the best thing to do, is to eliminate the use of tobacco products anywhere on school facilities. So we've taken that step.
Effective right now.
Effective right now. Board enacted that policy last night.
Dr. Pennington and I are recording our program on Tuesday the 15th of October. The Tulsa World newspaper on that date had an article, if you want to refer back to it at some point, but it was an editorial about how funding and how maybe the way that we think about funding and the political thinking of funding education needs to change. And I know you wanted to comment on this article in the Tulsa paper.
They, in the last month or so, the Tulsa World has ran 2 articles about school funding. One of those was an article that showed that that funding in Oklahoma has been cut the largest percentage of any state in the country from 2009 until where we are today, fiscal year 14, and we've been cut 22%. They also have had an article which shows that we actually were cut another 2% this year, that our funding from 2013, from the 2012-13 school year to the 2013-14 school year, has been cut an additional 2% based upon an increase in students and inflation. And most people would say, well, wait a minute, we read in the paper last year that funding for schools went up, but it did. It went up $25 million into the funding formula, which is what we use to pay teacher salaries, to pay our light bills, to buy supplies and materials. That's how we operate our schools. And then there was a presentation by some Tulsa finance officials, Tulsa County school officials early in the week. An article was in Monday's paper, which showed that when you compare us with our region, which is Texas, Kansas, Arkansas, Missouri, Colorado, and New Mexico, that the amount of money that our funding has been reduced is the largest in the region. So our funding has been cut the largest percentage of any state in the United States, and which means, and our region would apply to that too, and that the gap between us and the states in our region has grown. Almost every state has cut education funding since the recession of 2008, 2009. And I think we understand that. I mean, I understand that as a school administrator. But what is frustrating to us is that we continue to lag the rest of the country as we start putting money back into schools. And so what the Tulsa World editorial does is it says, okay, we see that, and we're a little surprised by that. And the Tulsa World cites polls that show that the citizens of this state have said that education funding is a priority, that it is the most important thing we do, and that we want our schools to be funded adequately. The editorial goes on to say, and I'm going to have to read this because I think it's important. It concludes with this statement: until education supporters can convince lawmakers that the majority, the public, will vote for candidates who support more school funding, and in parentheses it says, and against those who don't, there won't be any more funding for schools. We'll get the results we're getting. So what the Tulsa World is basically saying is, until those who support public schools stand united and take their case to the legislature, there will be no change. We will continue to have had the highest cuts in the country. We will continue to have 20% less funding than we had in 2008, 2009. Next Tuesday, October 22nd, we have a lady named Melissa Aldo, who's from the Tulsa area, coming to talk to the parents of the Ponca City schools about the forming of a Parent Legislative Action Committee. This is a movement that started in Tulsa County. It started in Jinx, has spread to Tulsa County, and it now is growing throughout the state. It's a nonpartisan group of parents who meet to talk about school legislative issues. Obviously, funding is important to that group. Testing is important to that group. And what this group does is it's committed to interacting with the legislature, with our local legislatures, on school issues that are important to parents. There are some important issues that are important to me and may be important to the school district, but we don't see those the same way parents do. So I think this is a critical thing for us as we move forward. I think it goes back to what the Tulsa World's saying. If people who support education want to see a change, they have to get involved in the process. Me going to Oklahoma City and talking to not only our local legislators, but talking to the members of the legislature about increasing in school funding isn't getting anywhere. Okay? So if we want that to happen, then we have to become united as a community and as a people, and we have to stand and tell the legislature that when those groups out there say that we spend too much on public schools or we spend too much money as state government, that they do not speak for all Oklahomans. Now, if we don't want to do that, then what's happened effectively is that the state of Oklahoma has, without having taken a vote, they've cut school spending 20%. And they used the recession to do that. And so I don't think our people would have stood for that. I think if the legislature would have taken a vote, and that vote would have been, we're going to cut $200 million from education funding in the state, I think our citizens would have stood up and protested loudly that decision. But in reality, that's what's happened. And so either we're going to reverse that trend, and we're going to make it very clear to the legislature that we want that funding restored, or Ponca City Public Schools is going to have to make budget adjustments that reflect a 20% cut in funding. You know, we've been through this now for 5 years, but we've treated that as if it were temporary. That this was a bump in the road, and that we were going to, we've acted in such a way that we have not cut our expenditures 20%. We've used federal money, we've used carryover money to protect our school programs. Because 20% cut is a big cut. I mean, if you cut your household budget by 20%, you're not just saying I'm not going to buy Oreos anymore. You're talking about making some serious decisions about how you feed your family and how you pay your bills. Well, we've done that. We've covered that as much as we can. And so now we're at the point, and I talked to principals about that today, where we got to have some serious discussions. And we're going to have to make some cuts to some programs that are very near and dear to our hearts. We're talking about whether you're going to cut off a hand or cut off a foot, and that's really where we are. And I think the Tulsa World Editorial does a very good job of laying that out to people, and that we can't passively sit by anymore and expect the legislature, because they've shown they're not going to do that. They've shown that they're willing to accept that 20% as the status quo and build from there. And we've never done that before when we've had a recession. When we've had a recession, we've had that recession, but within 1 or 2 legislative sessions, we've restored that funding that school districts lost. And we've not done that with this recession.
You mentioned that, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but you mentioned she'll be here. Is that going to be something that's going to be open to the public?
She's going to be here October 22nd at 6:30 in the Howell Auditorium. I forgot to mention that. We've sent letters to every elementary parent. We have contacted high school parents, and middle school parents should receive a notice by email today. I think that we're going to send something out to the newspaper, to the radio stations, so they can announce this meeting. We're hoping, obviously we want parents at this meeting because it is a Parent Legislative Action Committee, but anybody that's interested and concerned about school funding and wants to be a part of this group, we would like for you to be there. Again, my hope is that when this meeting is finished, that our parents will say, yes, we think we need to have a Parent Legislative Action Committee, and they will elect officers, and those people then will organize that group, and they will run this organization from this point on. I mean, I'll work with them as close as they want me to work. As a district, we will provide them all the information we have, but this needs to be a parent-driven initiative. And so all I'm doing is bringing everybody together for a meeting. And I hope after this time that leaders will step up, that some of those parents in our community, and we have lots of people who are involved in lots of different community activities, and they'll take that expertise they developed over the years in organizing our community, but that this time they'll organize our community for schools. We need leaders, especially those leaders that have children in our schools, to come forward and be involved in this. We don't need people sitting on the sidelines. We need people. We're at that point. You know, we're past sitting on the sidelines and people passively being involved. We need active involvement, by everyone in our community, but especially our parents, the people who have children in our schools, to drive this effort.
Every community, I assume, across the state are all going to try to get these same type of committees together, and you move mountains with a lot of people. So
We have invited all the school districts in Kay County to attend this meeting on Tuesday. We've invited all the school districts in Osage County, Payne County, and Pawnee County. I don't know if any of them will come. They may have their own, be planning their own initiatives.
Sure.
But we're really at that point where it's time to bring parents from across the state of Oklahoma together to talk about the issues that are important to them. Obviously, the one I'm most concerned about is funding. I know parents are very concerned about testing. How much we test our students. What do we use those assessments for? This is a great organization to express those concerns. I mean, is it about money today? Yes. But eventually I think it'll be about other things. And so, my goal would be that this group would start and they would be a player in Oklahoma education legislation from this point on. Because I think we need that voice.
Very good. Thanks for your time. Dr. Pennington on the October board wrap-up. Goodbye.